Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. I'm Enrique. Never thought I'd be writing one of these, but life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you, doesn't it? I'm a businessman, successful by most standards, and I worked my way up from nothing. My wife, Sherry, has been by my side for 16 years. We've got triplets, 3 teenagers now, and they've been the light of my life. At least, I thought they were. The story starts a few months ago. I started noticing little things, like how Sherry would lock her phone screen when I walked by. She started going out with friends more often, but when I asked who she was meeting, she'd just laugh and brush me off. I didn't think too much of it at first. Everyone needs their space, right? Then there was Ray, my best friend since college and a guy who's been gunning for my company for years. Lately, he'd been way too interested in how things were running. He'd make comments about how I could loosen my grip a little and let others help. I thought he was just being competitive. The real blow came from an unexpected place. My triplets, Diego, Mia, and Sofia, started acting distant. Teenagers can be moody, sure, but this felt different. They avoided me, stopped coming to our family dinners, and suddenly, they were spending a lot of time with Uncle Ray. I chalked it up to his easygoing nature. He's the fun one, after all. But the cracks in my family were showing, and I had no clue how deep they went. Then came the slip-up that changed everything. Sherry left her email open on the shared family computer one night. I wasn't snooping, at least, not intentionally, but a string of messages caught my eye. They were between her and Ray, and what I saw made my stomach drop. They were plotting, sharing confidential information about my company, laughing at my expense, and talking about a future where I was out of the picture. They even had my kids convinced that Ray was their real father. I can't explain the kind of pain that hits you when your entire world flips upside down like that. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the deliberate, calculated nature of it. They weren't just trying to take my company, they were trying to erase me from their lives. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up replaying every moment from the past few years, wondering how I missed the signs. But there's one thing you should know about me: I don't back down. If they wanted me out, they were going to have to fight for it. Little did they know, I was already planning my next move. The day after I found those emails, I knew I needed to keep my head on straight. Blowing up at Sherry or Ray wouldn't solve anything, it'd just tip them off. Instead, I started playing my cards close to the chest. If they thought I was clueless, I could gather what I needed to expose them. First, I called up a security consultant I'd worked with before, a real no-nonsense guy named Hector. I explained the situation without naming names, and he helped me set up surveillance. Cameras in my office, a few discrete recorders in the house, and most importantly, software to track emails and messages sent from devices on our Wi-Fi. I felt sick doing it, especially in my own home, but I didn't see another way. Over the next few weeks, I uncovered more than I could stomach. Sherry wasn't just leaking information to Ray, she was actively feeding him intel to undermine me in the boardroom. They'd been working together to sway shareholders, framing me as some kind of outdated dictator who couldn't adapt to the modern market. And the kids? That was the worst part. Ray had been planting seeds in their heads for years, subtly convincing them I was a distant, selfish father who cared more about money than family. He'd take them out to fancy dinners, buy them gifts, and tell them things like, "Your dad just doesn't get you the way I do." It broke my heart to see messages between my own children, speculating if Ray might actually be their biological father. Sherry didn't even bother to correct them. Instead, she leaned into the lie, saying, "Sometimes the truth is complicated." It wasn't long before I had all the evidence I needed: emails, voice recordings, even a video of Sherry meeting Ray at a cafe to exchange documents. But exposing them wasn't going to be enough. If I made the betrayal public without a plan, the company would suffer. My employees, hundreds of people who relied on me for their livelihoods, would pay the price. I needed a way to neutralize Ray and Sherry without collateral damage. In the meantime, I had to pretend everything was normal. Family dinners were excruciating. Sherry would make small talk like nothing was wrong, the kids barely spoke to me, and all I could think about was the betrayal. Every smile felt fake, every word like a knife twisting deeper into my back. But I played along, biding my time. Then one evening Diego, my oldest, dropped a bombshell. "Uncle Ray says he's looking at buying into some other companies," he said casually over dinner. "He told me you should probably retire soon, Dad, before someone pushes you out. Sherry froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, and for a second, I thought she was going to snap. But she just laughed and said, "Ray's always been a little too honest for his own good." I forced a chuckle, pretending it didn't sting. That night, I sat alone in my office, staring at the family photo on my desk. I had to fix this, not just for me, but for the kids. They were being manipulated, used as pawns in a game they didn't even know they were playing. I wasn't going to let Ray steal my family or my legacy. The wheels were turning, and I started putting my plan into motion. Once I decided I wasn't going to let them win, I knew I needed to act fast. The first step was locking down the company. I had to make sure Ray couldn't worm his way in before I had a chance to expose him. That meant getting ahead of him in the boardroom without tipping him off. I started by reaching out to a few trusted colleagues, people who had been with me since the early days of the business. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to paint a picture. There's been some unusual activity on the corporate side. I need your help to stabilize things while I sort it out. They were loyal, and that loyalty gave me room to maneuver. At home, things were getting worse. Diego, Mia, and Sophia were pulling further away, and Sherry's lies were starting to show cracks. One night, Mia got into an argument with Sherry at dinner, something about being grounded for missing curfew. "Why do you even care what I do?" Mia snapped. "It's not like you're ever honest about anything." The room went silent. I felt my chest tighten, wondering if she'd found something out, but then she stormed upstairs before anyone could ask questions. Even the kids were starting to sense something wasn't right, but that wasn't enough. They were still too deep under Ray's influence to see the bigger picture. I had to make them see the truth. Step 2 of my plan was trickier, setting up a confrontation without anyone realizing they were walking into a trap. I waited until the perfect opportunity presented itself, a family gathering that Sherry had been planning for weeks. It was one of those perfect image events she loved to host, where she could play the doting wife and mother in front of friends and extended family. That night, while Sherry was busy making appetizers and schmoozing with the guests, I slipped into her home office. I connected the hidden camera system to the TV in the living room, the same one everyone would gather around later for games and conversation. I set the feed to play the most damning clips I'd collected, Sherry handing documents to Ray, laughing about the clueless husband, and even a conversation where Ray explicitly called me a stepping stone. Once the trap was set, I made myself scarce, pretending to mingle while keeping an eye on the clock. It was only a matter of time before the kids sat down with the adults for family trivia, a tradition Sherry insisted on at every gathering. When the moment came, I acted casual, suggesting we start with a special presentation. As the screen flickered on and the first video began to play, the room fell into stunned silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Sherry's betrayal unfolded in crystal-clear detail. The kids' faces went pale, and Sherry, she just froze. For once, the master manipulator had no words. Ray wasn't there, of course, he was too careful for that. But it didn't matter. His name was all over the footage, and his role in the conspiracy was undeniable. "What is this, Dad?" Diego finally choked out, his voice shaking. "Is this real?" I didn't sugarcoat it. "It's real," I said, looking each of my children in the eye. "Your mother and Ray have been working together to take me down. And they used you to help do it." Sherry exploded, her voice rising over the stunned murmurs. "This is ridiculous. How dare you invade my privacy like this?" But the damage was done. The evidence spoke for itself, and everyone in the room could see it. Mia was the first to crack. Tears streamed down her face as she stood and turned to her mother. "How could you? How could you do this to Dad? To us?" For the first time in weeks, I saw doubt on Sherry's face. The perfect mask she wore in front of everyone was finally slipping. I didn't say much else that night. There was no point in dragging it out further. I'd made my move, and now it was up to them to decide what came next. But as I stood there, watching the fallout begin, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. After the videos played, the house was in chaos. Sherry kept trying to spin the situation, alternating between tears and yelling. "This is all a misunderstanding," she insisted, her voice shaky but defiant. "Ray and I were just talking about business. Enrique's twisting things because he's paranoid." But no one was buying it. The evidence was too damning, and her performance only made her look guiltier. Most of the guests quietly left, avoiding eye contact with either of us. All that remained were the kids and a few close family members who looked just as stunned as the triplets. "Mom, just stop," Diego said, his voice low but sharp. He was always the one who idolized her the most, and seeing the betrayal hit him like a truck. "You're not going to talk your way out of this." Mia and Sophia sat together on the couch, both crying. They didn't even look at Sherry. It was like they didn't recognize her anymore. "Kids, listen to me," Sherry pleaded, moving toward them, but they recoiled as if she'd burned them. He's just a friend. Everything your father is saying is exaggerated." "Then explain the emails," I said, cutting in for the first time since the videos ended. My voice was calm, but I made sure every word landed like a hammer. "Explain why you told Ray my trade secrets. Explain why you let him convince our children that he's their father." Sherry opened her mouth to respond, but faltered. The weight of what she'd done was finally crashing down on her. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "You didn't mean for us to find out, you mean," Mia snapped, her tone uncharacteristically cold. Diego stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. "Is it true? Is he our father?" He looked at Sherry, then at me, his face a mix of confusion and anger. "Someone tell me the truth." I took a deep breath, my heart breaking as I met his gaze. "Diego, I don't know. That's something we're going to figure out. But let me be clear about one thing. I've been your father since the day you were born, and nothing will change that." The words came out steady, but inside I felt like I was falling apart. It killed me that my kids were even questioning their place in my life. But I couldn't let them see that. Sherry started to cry again, louder this time. "It's not like that. Ray was just trying to help me understand things you wouldn't talk about, Enrique. I was lonely, and he was there." "You were lonely?" I shot back, my patience snapping. "So you decided to destroy our family? Lie to our kids? Sell out my company? Don't blame this on loneliness, Sherry. You knew exactly what you were doing." She looked down, wringing her hands but saying nothing. For once, she didn't have a comeback. By then, Diego had stormed upstairs, slamming his bedroom door loud enough to rattle the windows. Mia and Sophia followed shortly after, neither of them even glancing at Sherry as they left. The room was deathly quiet. I stared at her, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "You need to leave," I said finally, my voice ice-cold. "I'll deal with the lawyers. But tonight, you're not staying here. Enrique, please." "No," I cut her off. "You've done enough." She didn't argue. Maybe she finally realized there was no saving face. She grabbed her keys and left without another word. Once the door closed, I sank into the nearest chair, my head in my hands. The adrenaline that had been keeping me going all night was gone, replaced by a crushing wave of exhaustion and grief. I wanted to run after the kids, to tell them everything would be okay, but I didn't have the words. Not yet. I sat there for hours, staring at nothing, replaying every moment in my head. The house was silent, but the damage was deafening. The morning after the confrontation felt surreal. The house, normally filled with the chatter and noise of the triplets, was eerily quiet. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the betrayal playing on a loop. But I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. I started the day by calling my lawyer Marco, someone I trusted with my life. I told him everything, sparing no detail. "This isn't just about my marriage," I said. "It's about my company, my kids, my reputation. I need to make sure they can't destroy everything I've built." Marco didn't miss a beat. "We'll start with securing your assets. If Sherry's been leaking information to Ray, there's a strong case for breach of trust. As for the kids, we'll figure that part out. Are you sure you want to pursue this?" "I don't have a choice," I said, my voice flat. "If I don't, they'll take everything." After hanging up, I sat in my office, staring at the stack of papers on my desk. The business had always been my sanctuary, a place where I felt in control. But now, it felt like another battlefield. By mid-morning, I knew I couldn't avoid the kids any longer. I found them in the living room, sitting together but not speaking. Diego was scrolling through his phone, Mia was hugging her knees to her chest, and Sophia just stared at the floor. "Can we talk?" I asked, standing awkwardly in the doorway. They looked up, their faces a mix of anger, confusion, and sadness. No one said anything, but they didn't stop me when I sat down. "I know last night was a lot," I started, choosing my words carefully. I wish I could tell you that everything's going to be fine right away, but I won't lie to you. It's going to take time. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Mia asked, her voice trembling. You knew what Mom was doing, didn't you? I nodded slowly. I found out a few weeks ago. I didn't say anything because I wanted to protect you. I needed to make sure I had proof before confronting her. So what now? Diego asked, his tone sharp. Is she just gone? Are we supposed to pretend she doesn't exist? No, I said firmly. She's still your mother. No matter what happens between us, I'll never try to take her away from you. But I need you to understand that what she did, what she and Ray did, was wrong. And I won't let them hurt this family any more than they already have. Sophia finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. Is it true, about Uncle Ray? That he might be our dad? That question hit me like a freight train. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. We'll figure that out, I said gently. But no matter what, you are my children. Nothing will change that. Tears welled up in her eyes, and I reached out, putting a hand on hers. I've been your dad since day one, Sophia. That's not going to stop because of someone else's lies. She nodded, wiping her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a small glimmer of hope. They weren't ready to trust me completely, not yet, but they hadn't given up on me either. The rest of the day was slow. Sherry called once, but I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses. Instead, I focused on the company, drafting a plan to address the fallout from Ray's interference. I sent Marco the evidence I'd collected, knowing he'd use it to start building a case. That evening, I made dinner for the kids, spaghetti, their favorite. We ate in near silence, but it was a step forward. They didn't retreat to their rooms after the meal, instead sitting with me in the living room as we watched a movie. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. Before bed, Diego stopped by my office. Hey Dad, he said hesitantly. Yeah. I'm sorry for last night. I didn't mean to yell. It's just, everything's so messed up right now. I stood and put a hand on his shoulder. I know, Diego. You don't have to apologize. None of this is your fault. He nodded, his eyes still clouded with doubt. Good night, he mumbled before leaving. I sat back down, my heart heavy but determined. This wasn't going to be easy, but I'd already lost too much to give up now. My kids deserved better. They deserved the truth, no matter how painful it was. The next few days were a whirlwind of damage control. My lawyer Marco worked fast, filing orders to secure my assets and prevent Ray from making any sudden moves in the company. Meanwhile, I had to navigate the tense atmosphere at home. The kids were quieter than usual, but they were staying close. That gave me some hope. Then came the call from Ray. I was in my office when my phone buzzed, his name flashing on the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. Ray, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Enrique, he replied, his tone infuriatingly casual. I think we need to talk. I think we're past that. I know you're upset, he said, sounding almost smug. But this doesn't have to get ugly. We can work something out, keep things amicable. My jaw clenched. You mean you're hoping I'll let you off easy? Come on, he laughed lightly. Let's be reasonable. You've built something great, but maybe it's time to let new leadership take over. We both know you've been stretched too thin. His arrogance made my blood boil, but I kept my voice steady. You mean you and Sherry, right? The dream team. There was a long pause. I imagined the smirk wiping off his face. Don't drag her into this. She's been through enough. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, she's been through enough? You manipulated my kids, tried to steal my company, and you think you're the victim? Let me tell you something, Ray. You've underestimated me. Is that a threat? No, it's a promise. I hung up, my hands shaking with adrenaline. Ray wasn't just a backstabber. He was delusional if he thought I'd roll over and let him take everything I'd worked for. That evening, I gathered the kids again. I want you to know something, I said, meeting each of their eyes. I'm not giving up on us. No matter what happens with your mom or Ray, I'll fight to keep this family together. Mia nodded, her expression softening. We believe you, Dad. It's just hard to process. I know, I said. But we'll get through this. Together. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was gaining ground. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. A week later, Marco called with an idea I had been avoiding, a paternity test. If Ray's been planting lies about the kids, we need to squash that rumor, he said. It's not just about you. It's for them too. I hesitated. The thought of finding out the triplets might not be mine was terrifying. But Marco was right. If we were going to move forward, the truth had to come out. When I brought it up to the kids, I tried to be gentle. I think we need to do a DNA test, I said during dinner. Not because I doubt your mind, but because I want to end any doubts Ray put in your heads. The table went quiet. Diego finally broke the silence. Do you think he's our dad? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. No, I said firmly. But we need to prove it. They agreed, reluctantly, and the next day we went to the clinic. It was a painful, awkward experience, but the kids seemed to understand why it was necessary. I told them we'd face the results together, no matter what. The waiting was agonizing. Every time I looked at the kids, I felt a mix of pride and dread. What if the test confirmed Ray's lies? How would I ever make them believe I still loved them the same? When the results came in a few days later, I opened them alone in my office. My hands trembled as I scanned the page, but when I saw the word excluded next to Ray's name, I let out a shaky breath. Relief washed over me. He wasn't their father. They were mine. That evening, I shared the news. Ray's not your father, I said, holding up the results. He lied to all of us. Sophia burst into tears, but this time they seemed like tears of relief. Diego and Mia looked at each other, then back at me, their expressions softening. Thanks for doing this, Dad, Diego said quietly. We're sorry we doubted you, Mia added. I shook my head. Don't apologize. None of this was your fault. It wasn't a complete fix, but for the first time, I felt like we were turning a corner. The relief from the DNA test didn't last long. 2 days later, Marco called with bad news. Ray's making a move, he said grimly. He's trying to push for an emergency shareholder meeting. He's claiming you're unfit to lead. On what grounds? I asked, my heart sinking. He's spinning the situation with Sherry, Marco replied. Leaking just enough to make it sound like your personal life is out of control. He's counting on the scandal to sway people. I slammed my fist on the desk, rage bubbling up. Ray wasn't just trying to take the company. He was attacking my reputation, my family. I knew he'd stoop low, but this was a new level. Marco's advice was clear. We need to counter this fast. The board respects you, but they need reassurance. Show them you're in control. That evening, I called a meeting with my senior team. I was honest, explaining that Ray had been trying to undermine me and that I was addressing issues at home. This company means everything to me, I said firmly. I won't let anyone jeopardize it, not Ray, not anyone. The response was better than I expected. My team rallied behind me, promising to hold the line against Ray's push. It gave me some breathing room, but I knew it wasn't over. At home, the kids noticed the tension. Is Uncle Ray trying to take the company? Mia asked one night after dinner. He's trying, I admitted. But I won't let him. Diego frowned. What can we do? Just focus on being yourselves, I said. I'll handle Ray. Their support meant everything, but I couldn't ignore the weight of what was ahead. The fight wasn't just for my company, it was for my name, my family, my future. A week later, I got an unexpected call from Sherry. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what she could possibly say. Enrique, she started, her voice softer than I'd heard in years. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but, can we talk? Please. I wasn't in the mood for more excuses, but I needed to know what she was planning. I'm listening, I said, keeping my tone cold. I made a mistake, she admitted. I was angry, I was lonely, and Ray convinced me. He said things about you, about us. I let myself believe him. But Enrique, I swear, I didn't want it to go this far. Go this far. I repeated, my anger bubbling up. Sherry, you didn't just make a mistake. You lied to me. You lied to the kids. You almost destroyed everything I built. I know, she said, her voice breaking. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I want to fix things for the kids. Her words hung in the air. A part of me wanted to believe her, for the kids' sake, if nothing else. But the other part knew better. This wasn't about remorse, it was about damage control. I don't trust you, Sherry, I said finally. And I don't know if I ever will again. There was a long pause before she replied. I deserve that, she whispered. But if there's even a chance we can fix this for the kids, I'm willing to try. I didn't answer. The betrayal was too fresh, too deep. I'll think about it, I said before hanging up. That night, I sat with the kids, wondering if they'd want her back in their lives. I didn't bring it up, not yet. Whatever came next, it had to be their decision too. After my conversation with Sherry, I couldn't stop thinking about what the kids needed. As much as I despised what she'd done, they deserved a chance to figure out their relationship with her on their terms. A few days later, I sat the triplets down in the living room. They looked uneasy, probably sensing I had something serious to say. Your mom called me, I started. She wants to talk, maybe even try to make things right. Mia's face hardened. Make things right? After what she did. She says she regrets it, I said. But I'm not asking you to forgive her, not yet, not ever if that's how you feel. I just need to know what you want. If you don't want to see her, I'll support that. But if you do, I'll figure out how to make it happen safely. The room was quiet for a long time. Finally, Sophia spoke up, her voice trembling. I miss her, but I don't know if I can trust her anymore. Diego nodded. Same here. She lied to all of us. But I want to hear what she has to say. Mia crossed her arms, looking torn. I don't know, she muttered. I feel like if we let her back in, she'll just hurt us again. I understand, I said. This isn't an easy decision. Take your time. Whatever you choose, I'll be here for you. They didn't have an answer right away, and I didn't push them. I could see they were struggling, caught between their love for their mother and the pain she'd caused. That evening, Diego came to me while I was working in my office. Dad, he said hesitantly, if we do meet with her, will you be there? Of course, I said. I'm not letting her hurt you again. He nodded, looking relieved. Okay, then. I think we should at least hear her out. It wasn't the resolution I wanted, but it was a step forward. The next move would be hers. When I called Sherry to tell her the kids wanted to meet, she sounded both relieved and nervous. We agreed to keep it low-key, just her and the kids in a public park where I could supervise from a distance. The day of the meeting, the triplets were quieter than usual as I drove them to the park. Mia stared out the window, Sophia clutched a book she hadn't opened, and Diego kept tapping his phone, though I doubted he was reading anything. Sherry was already waiting when we arrived, sitting on a bench with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked different, tired, guilty. The kids hesitated when they saw her, but I gave them a nod. Take your time, I said softly. As they approached, I stayed back, close enough to see but far enough to give them privacy. Hi, Mom, Sophia said first, her voice tentative. Sherry's eyes filled with tears. Hi, sweetheart. I missed you so much. Mia crossed her arms but didn't say anything. Diego stayed a step behind, his expression guarded. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Sherry said, her voice breaking. But I want you to know how sorry I am. I made terrible mistakes, and I hurt all of you. If I could take it back, I would. Sophia wiped her eyes but didn't move closer. Why, Mom? Why would you do this to us? I don't have a good answer, Sherry admitted. I was angry and selfish, and I let myself believe lies. I thought I was doing what I needed to be happy, but I was wrong. So wrong. Diego spoke next, his voice cold. You didn't just hurt Dad. You lied to us. You let us think Ray might be our father. Sherry flinched. I can't excuse that, she said. I don't know what I thought. She stopped, struggling to find the words. The conversation was raw, painful. The kids asked hard questions, and Sherry didn't shy away from them. She cried, apologized, and admitted her faults, but she didn't push for forgiveness. After an hour, Mia stood abruptly. I'm done, she said, her voice flat. I can't do this right now. She walked toward me, and I could see the tears in her eyes. Sophia and Diego stayed a little longer before joining us. Sherry stayed on the bench, watching us leave. Are you okay? I asked as we walked back to the car. I don't know, Mia said, brushing past me to get in the car. None of them said much on the drive home. But later that evening, Sophia sat next to me on the couch and leaned against my shoulder. Thanks for being there today, Dad, she whispered. Always, I said, wrapping an arm around her. The meeting with Sherry stirred up a storm in the house. The kids, who had already been struggling, seemed to pull even further into themselves. Mia spent hours holed up in her room, her music playing loud enough to drown out the world. Diego was quieter than I'd ever seen him, shutting himself away with his laptop. Sophia barely left the living room, sketching in her notebook but tearing up page after page as if she couldn't get anything right. I gave them space, but it hurt to watch. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Family had always been my anchor, and now it felt like we were all drifting apart. A few days after the meeting, Sherry called again. "How are they?" she asked softly, skipping the pleasantries. "They're hurt, Sherry," I said, not sugarcoating it. "This isn't something you can just apologize your way out of. They need time." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" "I don't know," I admitted. "That's not something I can answer. You broke their trust. That's not easy to fix." She sighed heavily, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the choices she'd made, the lies, the betrayal, and any sympathy vanished. If you really want to make things right, focus on being honest with them from now on. No more excuses. No more manipulation. "I will," she said. "I promise." I didn't respond. Promises were meaningless without action, and Sherry had a long way to go before any of us could believe her again. Meanwhile, at work, the situation with Ray was escalating. Marco called to let me know that the emergency shareholder meeting was set for the following week. "Ray's using every angle he can," Marco warned. "He's framing himself as the savior the company needs, painting you as too distracted by personal drama to lead." I clenched my fist, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "He's desperate," I said. "He wouldn't be pushing this hard if he didn't think we had a chance to stop him." Marco agreed, but his tone was cautious. "Still, you need to go in prepared. Have the evidence ready, but be careful how you present it. If we play this wrong, it could backfire." I spent hours in my office that evening, poring over financial reports, crafting arguments, and carefully organizing the evidence of Ray's betrayal. I had to find the balance between protecting the company's image and exposing the truth. It felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of fire. Later that night, Diego came to find me. He lingered in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. "Hey, Dad," he said quietly. "Hey," I replied, setting my papers aside. "What's on your mind?" He sat down across from me, his expression serious. "Do you think Mom can ever make up for what she did?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "I don't know," I said honestly. "She's trying, but making up for something like this takes more than just saying you're sorry. It takes time, effort, and proving that she's really changed. And even then, it's up to you if you want to forgive her." Diego nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I don't think I can trust her again," he said after a moment. I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's okay. Trust isn't something you owe anyone, it's something they have to earn. You don't have to rush your feelings, Diego. Take your time." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mix of frustration and sadness. "Thanks, Dad," he said softly. "I just needed to hear that." As he stood to leave, I watched him go, my chest tight with a mix of pride and sorrow. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but moments like that reminded me why I had to keep fighting. My kids needed me, now more than ever. The day of the shareholder meeting arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and determination. Marco and I had prepared meticulously, but Ray was crafty, and I knew he wouldn't back down easily. As I walked into the boardroom, the atmosphere was tense. The room was filled with familiar faces, some I'd worked with for decades, others more recent additions who might be swayed by Ray's charm. He was already there, sitting at the far end of the table, wearing his usual smug expression. "Let's get started," the chairman said, his tone neutral but firm. Ray wasted no time launching into his pitch. He spoke about the company's future, emphasizing the need for stable leadership, and hinting at my supposed distractions without directly naming them. He painted himself as the logical choice to guide the company forward, leaning into his years of experience and connections. When it was my turn, I stood, letting the room settle before I began. "I won't deny that the past few months have been challenging," I said, meeting their gazes head-on. "But this company has faced challenges before, and we've always come out stronger. I'm not here to dwell on personal matters or trade insults. I'm here to remind you of what we've built together, And what's at stake? I laid out our recent successes, the strategic plans already in motion, and the growth opportunities we'd worked so hard to secure. Then, carefully, I introduced the evidence against Ray. Unfortunately, I said, not everyone in this room has had the company's best interests at heart. While I've been focusing on our future, others have been working behind the scenes to undermine our progress. I presented emails and documents, proof of Ray's attempts to sabotage deals, spread misinformation, and position himself as my replacement. The room was silent as the evidence mounted, the weight of his actions becoming undeniable. Ray tried to defend himself, accusing me of fabricating the evidence, but the damage was done. The board wasn't naive, and many of them had known me long enough to recognize the truth. When the meeting ended, the chairman announced the decision. Ray's push for control was rejected, and he was formally removed from his advisory role. The relief was immediate, but it didn't erase the bitterness I felt toward him. As the room cleared, Ray approached me, his face twisted with anger. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Oh, it is," I replied calmly. "You've lost, Ray. It's time to move on." He stormed out without another word, leaving me standing there, a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion washing over me. Later that evening, I returned home to the kids. They were waiting in the living room, clearly anxious. "How did it go?" Diego asked. "We won," I said, smiling for the first time in days. Sophia clapped, and Mia let out a small cheer. Diego grinned, relief spreading across his face. "You did it, Dad," he said, his pride evident. "No," I said, sitting down with them. "We did it. I couldn't have gotten through this without you." Their smiles gave me hope that, little by little, we were rebuilding what Sherry and Ray had tried to tear apart. Just when I thought we were finally out of the woods, Ray made his next move. A week after the boardroom victory, Marco called with news that hit like a punch to the gut. "Ray's filing a lawsuit," Marco said, his voice steady but grim. "He's claiming defamation and wrongful dismissal." I clenched the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "You've got to be kidding me. What's his angle?" "He doesn't have much of a case," Marco explained. "But that's not the point. He's not looking to win, he's looking to drag this out. He wants to force you into a drawn-out legal battle, one that could hurt your reputation and drain your resources." The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Ray couldn't win in the boardroom, so now he was trying to destroy me in the courts. It wasn't about justice. It was about revenge. That evening, I sat the kids down to explain what was happening. I kept it simple, focusing on the facts without getting into the uglier details. "Ray's trying to sue me," I said. "He's claiming I wrongfully pushed him out of the company. It's not true, and we'll fight it. But it might take some time to sort out." Mia frowned. "Can he actually win?" "No," I said firmly. "But that doesn't mean it won't get messy." Diego crossed his arms. "Why doesn't he just give up? He's the one who messed up." "Because he's Ray," I said, letting out a bitter laugh. "He doesn't know how to lose gracefully." Despite their worry, the kids rallied behind me. Their quiet support meant more than they knew, giving me the strength to face the battle ahead. A few days later, Sherry called. Her name flashing on my screen made my stomach churn, but I picked up. "I heard about Ray's lawsuit," she said, her voice hesitant. "What about it?" I asked, my tone sharp. "I think I can help," she said. "I know Ray better than anyone, Enrique. I know how he operates, the kind of tactics he uses. If you let me, I can give you the leverage you need to end this." Her offer left me speechless for a moment. Sherry, the woman who had betrayed me, was now offering to be an ally against Ray? "Why would you want to help me?" I asked cautiously. "Because this is my fault too," she admitted quietly. "I let him manipulate me. I let him get this far. I owe it to you, and to the kids, to fix what I can." I didn't know how to respond. On one hand, I didn't trust her. On the other, if she truly had insight that could dismantle Ray's case, it might be worth the risk. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice colder than I intended. After hanging up, I sat in my office, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I called Marco to discuss it, laying out Sherry's offer. "She could be playing you," Marco said bluntly. "But if she's serious, she might have information we can use, emails, documents, something concrete. If we bring her in, we need to control the narrative." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I'll decide soon. I don't want this to backfire." That night, As the house settled into silence, I found myself staring out the window, the city lights blurred by my thoughts. I'd been fighting Ray for months, but this felt like the final stretch. If I played my cards right, I could end this for good. But if I made the wrong move, the fallout could be devastating. I had to choose carefully, for my company, for my kids, and for the life I was trying to rebuild. After days of deliberation, I decided to take a calculated risk. I called Sherry and told her we could meet under specific conditions. She'd provide any evidence she had against Ray up front, and Marco would vet it before I used it. We met in a quiet cafe away from prying eyes. Sherry looked nervous, clutching a small folder as she sat down across from me. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she said, her voice trembling. "Don't thank me yet," I replied. "Let's see what you've got." She handed over the folder, her hands shaking. Inside were copies of emails and text messages between her and Ray, plans they'd made, deals he tried to sabotage, and even his initial pitch to convince her to betray me. "I kept these as insurance," she admitted. "I wasn't sure if I'd ever need them, but now I'm glad I did." Marco confirmed the evidence was legitimate, and it was damning. With these documents, we could prove Ray's actions were not only unethical but also illegal. It gave us the upper hand in court and the leverage we needed to negotiate. I filed the evidence through Marco and let Ray's legal team know we weren't backing down. Within a week, the tone of the lawsuit shifted. Ray's lawyers reached out to discuss a settlement. When we met in the courtroom, Ray's usual arrogance was gone. His lawyer presented a proposal. They'd drop the case if I agreed not to pursue criminal charges for corporate sabotage. I leaned over to Marco. "What's our best move?" "Take it," Marco said. "We've already won. Dragging this out further won't do you or the company any good." I agreed. The settlement was signed, and just like that, the lawsuit was over. Ray's last-ditch effort to take me down had failed, leaving him with nothing but a tarnished reputation. Back at home, I shared the news with the kids. "It's done," I said, smiling for what felt like the first time in months. Ray's out of our lives for good. The relief on their faces was palpable. Sophia hugged me tightly, and even Mia, who'd been the most distant, gave me a small smile. "You did it, Dad," Diego said, pride shining in his eyes. "No," I corrected, looking at all three of them. "We did it. Together." The road ahead wasn't perfect. Sherry still had a long way to go to rebuild any kind of relationship with the kids, and there were still wounds to heal. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we could finally move forward. Ray was gone. The company was secure. And most importantly, I still had my family.